It seems rather unanimous that death is rarely permanent in comics by DC and Marvel, but supporting characters do tend to be fair game, even if it's not always handled in the most tasteful manner. As of the time I'm saying all of this, Alfred Pennyworth has been dead for 6 years. Every year fans ask when he'll return, only for every person to write Batman in that time to go out of their way to make it clear that they have no intention of bringing him back, instead choosing to depict the impact this loss has had on the Bat family. Alfred did die in the Silver Age, but it was before he was as important to the Batman mythos as he is today, back when Bruce had only met him well into adulthood, by the time Dick was already Robin. This modern context, in which Alfred raised Bruce, offers a wealth of opportunities to challenge the Dark Knight in new ways. This is a Bruce Wayne who has rarely had to take care of himself, but also one who has taken it upon himself to take care of a Bat family. One with a teenage son who reminds him far too much of himself. Alfred's absence forces Bruce to step into the role of the sensible mentor. To some, Alfred serves the current decade of Batman stories better as a memory. Should Pennyworth eventually return, it will be to a world that is ever so slightly different. Perhaps one that has moved on without him. Not unlike Jason Todd, the second Robin. I feel as though the second Robin, now known as the Red Hood, is a contentious figure. There are undoubtedly some very loyal fans, and there are those with a surface level knowledge of the character's history who simply find the concept of a sidekick returning from the dead as a vengeful gunslinger cool. But there are also people who can't help but notice all of the missteps that surround his existence in the current day. He's undergone 3 reboots that have resulted in what feels like a different character each time. No one can seem to decide whether he and Bruce are on good terms, or whether he follows the family's no-kill rule. And unlike the Robin before him, he lacks the sheer amount of history to make up for how incomplete he feels at times. For some reason though, I still adore this character. I find myself asking how salvageable this mess is, if he should be a hero or a villain, or if he should have stayed dead. A lot of people are already aware that Jason has had more than one origin story. There's the origin story most are familiar with, which came about after Crisis on Infinite Earths rebooted the DC universe, and then there's the original in which the second Robin had a lot more in common with his predecessor, being the youngest in a trio of circus acrobats called the Flying Todds. Understandably, people tend to disregard the original. There really is no place for it, even under DC's current everything is canon approach to continuity. I will say the belief that Jason started off as a clone is somewhat overblown, and the depiction is certainly not lacking in self-awareness. Not only do the Flying Todds directly cite Dick Grayson's family as an inspiration, but when 2 of them are taken out by Killer Croc, Grayson is initially the one who wishes to adopt Jason, until Bruce steps in and does it instead. Jason even dyes his hair from red to black with the purpose of maintaining the illusion, something no longer acknowledged after Crisis, except for in the 2009 Batman and Robin book, where a young adult Jason is going bald because of the constant hair dye use. In hindsight, there was a clear attempt to flesh out the initial version of Jason. He was the first to be officially adopted as Bruce Wayne's son. He had an adorable mother-son dynamic with both Nocturna and Catwoman, and he had standout moments on occasion, like the time he outsmarted Mongol. It's just very difficult to deny that Jason only really existed to fill a void. At the time, the Titans had a very successful series, and one of the reasons was that it depicted the characters as young adults, which Dick had already been for more than a decade of real-world time by that point. It took him like 15 years to go from 18 to 19. Jason's co-creator even agrees that the changes made to his origin after the reboot were probably for the best. Readers wouldn't see the modern origin until after Batman Year One was finished, and around the time Year One was coming out, most Jason appearances took place in Detective Comics, so some debate the canonicity of these appearances, but somehow, this 13-issue run on Detective Comics written by Mike Barr actually features my favorite take on Jason as Robin. He's just a little goofball, the perfect counterbalance to the Dark Knight's no-nonsense attitude, though not as naive as he lets on. In Detective Comics 570, he stops Bruce from killing the Joker and reminds Bruce why they do what they do. The following issue is the most interesting to read in the 2020s, as it involves Scarecrow capturing Jason and infecting Bruce with a drug that makes him completely fearless to the point of recklessness and almost getting himself killed, with Bruce suppressing the drug's effect by thinking of the worst thing he could possibly fear. And it almost happens in 574 after Jason is shot by the Mad Hatter. This run not only shows us how much Batman needs a person like this by his side, but outright states that losing this kid would be Bruce's worst nightmare, which of course makes Jason's eventual fate all the more tragic, in retrospect. It's a well-documented fact that a lot of readers did not like Jason, hence the mean streak he was given towards the end of his time as the second Robin, informed by his updated backstory as a former thief from Crime Alley, though he did prove himself more than worthy of the mantle in the post-crisis retelling of his and Bruce's first encounter, pulling Batman's classic vanishing trick on Batman himself, and not taking Two-Face's life, even after discovering Two-Face murdered his father. This just wasn't enough for readers. Some were even frustrated by the inconsistent backstory and characterization. So the writer of A Death in the Family, Jim Starlin, who already didn't like Robin, intentionally played into the disdain readers had. A disdain made evident within the letter columns of Batman issues released in the aftermath of the poll that decided whether Jason would live or die. Even though I feel sorry for Robin and the pain he has gone through, I feel I must dial the kill number many times, exhausting my resources until Robin is dead. I'm not satanic, but in spite of DC, I want to see if you'll really do it, without bringing another Robin into the comic, without a dream sequence, even though I don't think you guys are that cheesy. I never cared much for Jason Todd, but when the Joker started Jason's spanking, I must admit I felt sorry for the little tyke. It's not enough to stop my vote though. He's history if I have anything to say about it, and I'll have a lot to say about it. I sold my new Mercedes to have enough money for votes. Bye bye, Jason. This is an extremely violent way for Jason to go, beaten then blown up real good. I just hope Batman gets an eye for an eye from the Joker. I'm tired of seeing villains get off scot-free in comics. I want to see the Joker punished for his crimes. Punished bad. A final thought. Now that Robin is dead, keep Batman alone for a while. He deserves some peace and solitude after 4 long years of the Bat Brat. I ought to mention that the vote was surprisingly close, and some readers who voted to have Jason killed off would even show remorse. This one's my favorite. Dear Bat people, I regretfully voted for Jason to die. At first, when I heard that you were going to kill him, I was overjoyed. But now that I've read the issue of Robin's demise, well, I'm sorry I helped kill him. Don't get me wrong, I think his death will improve Batman's already mean-spirited nature, but I'm still a little broken up. Hell, I even felt bad when Supergirl died, and I didn't even like her. I think you should dedicate an issue to Robin, a memorial for the little spud. From what I've read so far, Bats isn't really that broken up. I expected him to scream out and bash something, not just sit there quietly. I know, self-control, but everybody needs to grieve, to be human, and I think that you should show this side of Batman in an issue dedicated to the boy wonder who fought side by side with the Dark Knight. P.S. Sorry about Jason, Bats, but that's life in the comics biz. There's even a letter at the end of Batman 440 from a counselor working at a home for troubled boys, detailing the effect these comics had on these children who related to Jason. As funny as it is how many people, including grown adults, hated this character, real people that many call troubled are commonly met with similar hostility, and I think that's one of the things that endears Jason to people of younger generations, who read all of this with the knowledge of what became of him. I can understand why they may feel as though he was dealt a bad hand. In the 17 years of real-world time Jason spent dead, he would haunt Bruce by serving as a reminder of the Dark Knight's failures. When the time came for Tim Drake to succeed Jason, Tim couldn't bring himself to wear Jason's Robin costume because the history it carried was too daunting. There's an issue of Detective Comics where Bruce takes Cassandra Cain, who is only slightly older than Jason, to his grave on what would have been Jason's 18th birthday. Bruce talks about how he failed to give Jason the chance to a normal life, but he also attributes some of this to Jason's recklessness and overambition. That's the other common thread. Jason wasn't remembered as a martyr, but a cautionary tale. What happens when a Robin doesn't look before they leap? When being Robin becomes a thrill instead of a responsibility? Writers chose to have other characters remember him as the person he was towards the end as opposed to who he had always been. In Robin issue 10, when Tim teams up with the time-displaced Dick and gets a little in over his head, Dick calls him out on it, which reminds him of what happened to Jason. It's something Die Hard fans have taken issue with. I'm of two minds on the matter. On the one hand, I see why one might want to retroactively give Jason's time as Robin a consistent theme that it lacked outside of just being a replacement, and Jason being doomed from the start can enhance the tragedy that makes this character compelling in the present day. But I do think there is also a risk of dampening it, and misplacing the blame in a way that feels reactionary, perhaps even antithetical to the reverence for human life's sacredness that defines Batman's mission. If some people can't be saved, if some are just destined to disappoint us, is his war on crime not meaningless? And why doesn't he just kill them? Jason's been back from the dead for longer than he was dead, and longer than I've been alive, so a lot has happened in that time. He's led a team, a few times actually. He's trained a sidekick, not that anyone remembers her. He's been a crime lord, and through it all, Jason as the Red Hood is always in some way at odds with the rest of the Bat family, even when they do work together. He's developed a cynicism that the rest of them lack. In the Under the Red Hood story, where Jason first comes on the scene as a murderous vigilante, he specifically targets those he sees as beyond redemption, people it's difficult to feel sorry for. How do you rehabilitate pimps and human traffickers? Jason's personality really hasn't changed all that much. Like any Robin, he's quippy and cocky, but also surprisingly efficient. It's a testament to how well trained each member of the Bat family is. This is simply what happens when they don't hold back. It's just his outlook that's changed. The way Jason sees it, Batman's fighting a never-ending war and innocent people are going to get caught in the crossfire. The usual spiel about revolving doors. The problem is obviously that it shouldn't be an individual's place to decide who deserves to live, much less a deeply troubled 18-year-old or a guy who likes to dress up as a bat, and Bruce is correct in calling that line of thought a slippery slope. The depiction of Red Hood from 2005 to 2011 is not a sane individual. He breaks into Titan's tower and beats the shit out of Tim. He dresses up as Nightwing and goes on a killing spree. He dresses up as Batman, beats the shit out of Tim again, and goes on another killing spree. He sets off a bunch of explosives that he planted on a railway months in advance, just so Dick and Damian are too busy to chase him. He's kind of pathetic. Something that never fully changes, though he'd start to mellow out by the time of the New 52 and DC Rebirth, primarily as a result of being the protagonist of his own book, Red Hood and the Outlaws. It also helps that the New 52's when the 4 male Robins would receive the TMNT treatment, with team-ups becoming more frequent and each character being assigned a defining trait. We even see it today. Dick is the leader, Damian is the heart, Tim is the brains, and Jason as the rebel. This is why since then, Jason's been slightly less of a nuisance to his brothers. He does still beat the shit out of Tim though. As for Outlaws, it's all over the place and heavily reliant on the status quo brought about by the reboot it spins out of, though putting Jason on a team is definitely a step in the right direction. As Robin, he didn't get the chance to become a fully fledged Titan, and Tim was the first Robin to headline his own series, so Red Hood and the Outlaws was the first time Jason truly got to exist independently of Bruce. But, like I said, it heavily reflects the time. In most instances, it would be weird to see Jason hanging out with Starfire and Roy Harper, or Artemis and Bizarro, even though the latter roster could be quite charming at times. The idea of a dark trinity is pretty cool. It's a shame it only took 25 issues for Bizarro and Artemis to be written out of the book as it rebranded to Red Hood Outlaw, with so much of that relatively short time being dedicated to a generic will they won't they between Jason and Artemis, amidst the plotline about Bizarro becoming super intelligent. Outlaws is where Red Hood starts to toy with the idea of sticking to the family's no-kill rule, only for something to compel him to make an exception, though Bruce never completely gives up on him. It's also a run that unintentionally highlights the flaws that you might argue are inherent to the whole murderous vigilante gimmick. He shoots the Penguin only for Oswald to survive. It's not as if DC would ever permanently kill off any major Batman villains, I think this is why for the past decade the idea has been to use Jason's fluctuating stance on murder as an easy source of conflict. Some call it lazy, but what we might see as an inconsistency from a distance, like depictions of a teenage Jason as a hothead, or the constant making up and falling out with Bruce, though frustrating, does make sense in context. A writer is out to tell a story, not adhere to a list of bullet points. There's going to be conflict between the wholesome moments of Batman hugging his former sidekicks. I found myself going back and forth on this, but I don't think Jason Todd is a poorly fleshed out character and hasn't been for a long time. It's just that after rereading nearly every one of his appearances, there still isn't much I can recommend without providing additional context. There isn't a run I often find myself revisiting. The ongoing series from 2025 could have been that. It would have taken place in a new location away from Gotham, and would have been targeted at mature readers. But DC cancelled it and pulled the first issue from digital platforms on the day of release, simply because the writer dared to show disgust towards a political commentator who called the Civil Rights Act a mistake. Of course, DC seemingly has no problem with the writer of the Batman storyline the Red Hood book was supposed to spin out of, who was accused of racism by an Asian actor in a show he worked on. DC also continued to hire the writer of Red Hood and the Outlaws, despite the accusations of sexual harassment. I guess that's life in the comics biz. If nothing else, Jason Todd has become something special on a conceptual level. His existence is one defined by perceived failure, both in real life and in universe. Deemed a failure by the system, deemed a failure as Robin, he's been taught to believe people will eventually let you down, and that he is one of those people. But somehow, despite all the terrible things he's experienced, and all the questionable things he's done, every now and then Jason shows us that this isn't true, and that's the tragedy of it all. Jason is a clear example as to why Batman can never kill. He's proof that no life is worthless, no matter what anyone says, and that those deemed insignificant can leave an impact, even if Jason himself may not always agree. I think that's what continues to draw me to this character despite my complaints. Though he may be the definition of wasted potential, he's never been anything else.